I'm Stephanie Leiden with GBH News, here along with Joe Kriesberg, who is the president and CEO of the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations. We also have with us today, I don't know if we get that on camera or not, we'll try, Ellen Shachter, who is with the Office of Housing Stability in Somerville, and Liz Niesloss, my colleague at GBH News, who has been part of our series called Priced Out, the Fight for Housing in Massachusetts. If you've been tuned in and watching here live at the Boston Public Library, I keep wanting to call it the Boston Public Radio, it is the library, or if you're joining us on our YouTube stream, welcome. You have seen some of the reporting and you can certainly see more of it online. As part of this project, we have invited people to share their stories and ask their questions, and we're inviting you to do more of that right now. Here at the library, if you would like, there is an area where our producers Annie and Alexi will be, and you can, hello, and you can go on up and write down questions, and they will keep an eye on those. We're also keeping an eye on YouTube, so if you've got a question you're watching on YouTube, you can put that right in the chat. And we'll do our best to get some answers, and we will also, importantly, talk about some of the solutions, because Joe and Ellen both say that the affordable housing crisis can actually be solved, which feels like an ambitious thing. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate your time today. As I mentioned, we've gotten a lot of feedback from our audience, and I'd like to start by sharing something that a woman wrote into us. It's really kind of stuck with me, I think because it's emblematic of a lot of the feedback we're hearing. This is a person who was living in Braintree, moved to Weymouth with her husband for less expensive housing. She's in her 60s, and it was all going fine. And then she said, we found a letter in our mailbox right before the 4th of July weekend saying only that our landlord was planning on selling this house, and he wasn't going to renew our lease that ends 9/2022, which is just weeks from now. We are so overwhelmed with fear and uncertainty as where and what now. I've been searching and looking and keep hitting a dead end. Please, if you can help, we'd be grateful. Ellen, I know you have been at this work for a long time as a housing attorney before your current role in Somerville, and I wonder if this is the kind of story you're hearing more of these days.
Yeah, so thanks so much for having me. Unfortunately, it is the kind of story that we are hearing all too frequently in Somerville. In the last 8 months, you being on this show prompted me to take a look at my statistics, and we had in the city of Somerville, which has a little over 80,000 people, over 1,000 people coming to us in the first 8 months of this year with problems relating to housing instability. And almost each and every one of those involves the kind of huge sense of trauma and fear and loss that that you have heard from this person who is reaching out to you. So we are hearing this almost daily. People who get rent increase notices, people who get notice to quit, people who just can't keep up with the pace of rent increases and are really desperate about where they're going to end up.
And Joe, I know that you, in your role overseeing community development corporations across the state, now these are organizations that help with affordable housing in many communities. I wonder if the perspective that Ellen is sharing is something you see on a statewide. Is that centered here in the greater Boston area, or are you seeing it beyond?
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for having us. It's absolutely a statewide problem. Yes, rents are higher here in greater Boston than most of the rest of the state, but so are incomes. And so when you get out to other parts of the state, people are having just as hard a time to make rent. And there's two things about this story I want to say. First and foremost, to the listener who wrote in and to everybody else, only a judge can evict you from your home. So if you get a notice to quit, if your landlord is trying to kick you out, you have rights. There is a process that the landlord has to follow. That may not be able to, you may not be able to stay forever, but you may have more time than you think, so please reach out, get assistance. Secondly, about that story, and we are seeing this all across the state, this crisis often happens when a building changes ownership and a new buyer comes in, a new owner comes in and wants to raise the rent, often because they've taken out debt or loans that require them to raise the rent. Maybe that was part of the whole plan right from the beginning. So I think that's one of the things we're seeing that in every kind of neighborhood across the state.
So you're talking about relating it back to the high cost of housing, these record high prices, people are making the investment and thus passing on the costs
Yes,
to renters.
The value of housing in the state and the scarcity of housing is attracting investors, both good investors and bad investors, who are looking to make money and sometimes make money very fast on the backs of people who can't afford it.
I know Liz has been keeping track of the people in the audience who've been writing in. Of course, you can do that on YouTube, and you can do that right here at the library.
And both Joe and Ellen, already you've touched on something that many people talk about, which is fear and what to do. There is nothing as frightening, one woman told me, as just the possibility of homelessness. We had an audience member write in and say, my brother and I work for the city of Boston. We have to live here for our residency requirements. We have our 68-year-old mother, our 31-year-old special needs brother. We have until, she wrote then, August 15th to move. We don't know what happened at this point. And although we make good money, we cannot find a place. The eviction on our record isn't helping. So how should people, Ellen, maybe you want to start with this one. How do people deal with that? How do they when they have an eviction on their record? And that goes also for no-fault evictions as well. It's an issue.
So there is a statewide campaign to do something called eviction record sealing that came very close to passing this year and in the previous year. So I am hopeful that there will be a legislative solution for this problem, because as you were indicating, many evictions have absolutely nothing to do with fault of tenants. And once you have that on your record, it is difficult. What I will say is you can't give up. You get a chance to explain what circumstances were. And in some cases, landlords, screening companies will be willing to hear what you have to say about the circumstances around the eviction.
In some cases, although I profiled a woman who's a preschool teacher, she was the victim, I guess you could say, of a no-fault eviction. She had paid her rent on time, put one foot in front of the other, felt she was doing everything right. And a housing expert in the area essentially said, you know, landlords often don't actually look to see whether it's fault or no fault. So, you know, it becomes a problem even there. Joe, did you want to weigh in?
Well, it's a major problem, and it's completely unfair in most cases. And that is why this legislation, which has been led by Senator Liddy Edwards from East Boston, is so important. And it's pending. It's part of the economic development bill that got stuck at the end of the legislative session. It was in the Senate version, and we need to get that to the finish line. And then we're probably going to have to make it stronger yet. But it's really important that we address that. It's similar to the issue with people who have criminal records, you know, trying to get a restart on their life and not being given that opportunity.
And Ellen, you've talked about something that also hinders people, which is the right to counsel. Why is that something that's so hard to get people?
You know, studies have shown, recent studies, that 85% of landlords around the Commonwealth are represented. In one recent study, approximately 8 to 10% of tenants are represented. Part of that is because of insufficient funding for legal services that exists out there, and it is so critical to you know, even that playing field.
Right.
We see huge differences in outcomes when tenants have legal representation.
I could just say, you know, one of the things we learned during the pandemic, when there was a widespread understanding that we did not want to see a lot of evictions during the pandemic. Yes, we had a moratorium, but the moratorium did not last forever and did not apply to everybody. But we also put in place in the state significant funding for rent relief to help people close the gap, but also mediation services and a substantial increase in representation through the Legal Services Network. And guess what? It worked. Yep. We reduced evictions by 90%, I think, for a while, which is extraordinary considering what was going on. So we know what the tools are, and there's no reason we can't have those tools all the time. That being said, as long as there is such an extreme scarcity of housing, and housing that's affordable at rents that people of modest means can pay, you know, we're going to see this kind of problem. So, you know, that is something we have to also address.
Right.
Can we talk for a minute about supply and demand? Because I think it's an interesting question. I mean, Ellen, we talked earlier, you were saying there's, and I've heard this statistic, there's 200,000 units short in the state. I mean, it's kind of this game of housing musical chairs, right? There's sort of not enough units for everyone. And I'm just talking market rate, just units of any sort. And yet, Joe, you have said building alone is not the solution. So I wonder if both of you could sort of weigh in on that. Does it do additional units help, and why aren't they? If there's not enough, why isn't that the solution?
Well, that's a graduate course in housing economics, the answer to that. But, a lot of folks like to say, listen, it's all economics 101, supply and demand. We need more supply because there's so much demand. But unfortunately, it's not housing 101. It's not that simple. It is a graduate level, if not higher. There are so many different factors. So absolutely, we need to build more housing at every income level. But supply and demand is not just measured in the number of humans who live in a place and the number of housing units. Housing units that are bigger are more expensive. When my wife and I bought our house, we finished off the attic into a master bedroom. We made the house bigger. We made the house more expensive. We did that. And people are doing that thousands of times all over the state all the time. And demand is not just in terms of humans. Household size is shrinking. So even with the same number of people, we need more units. And then you have the issue of money. Demand for housing is expressed in dollars, and some of us have a lot more dollars than other people. And so the income and wealth inequality in our society, which is massive and growing, is a major contributor to this. And unless we get our handles on some of these other dynamics, simply building more supply won't be enough, even though it's an essential piece of the puzzle.
Because the supply that is going up is not being built for everyone. Not everyone can get a piece of that.
The average home in this country is 50% bigger than it was, 50 years ago. And most of us are probably glad to have a larger home, but there's a price for that.
Yeah, and I would just add a few things to that. I think people in the housing world and housing business know that supply alone is not the answer. And I say this because there are some real positives that come from supply, and then there's some real negatives. Look at Somerville as an example. We have a lot of new development. Fortunately, the city of Somerville has taken bold steps to regulate what happens when new housing is built. So in Somerville, we get 20% of all units that are then affordable. And that does a lot to help us with our problem of supply of affordable housing. However, for the people that don't get in those units, luxury housing is driving up costs. So our median rents are higher because of that luxury housing. People want to be around where there's luxury housing. There's more amenities around, in some cases, around luxury housing. So at the same time, new development can help us with our tax base, can help create new units. But remember, housing is a basic human need. Supply and demand is really based on things that people can, if it costs too much, I'm not going to buy that. That doesn't really work when you're talking about something like housing that everybody must have.
So that's a question that many people have. It's actually doesn't seem to be a new one. Why am I seeing so much luxury housing being built in my area? Joe, do you have a feeling on that? Some of it is labeled luxury housing because it's in a very desirable area. It may not be what we with a pet spa or whatever really makes a luxury house. But why are we seeing so many things that look like luxury housing?
Well, a couple of things I would say, and just to build on one of the things that Ellen said about new construction, does it help or hurt, and where the same thing can help in some ways and hurt in others. And so what helps across the regional supply might have local impacts on that neighborhood that are different because housing markets are so location specific. But one reason that we're seeing a lot of luxury housing, look, most developers and investors are trying to make as much money as they can from their investments. That's just a basic rule of economics. But the cost of construction, land, labor, materials, is so high, it costs about $500,000 to build an apartment, a modest apartment, in a large apartment building, never mind a single family home. And if it takes $500,000 to build the apartment, you need to charge rent probably around $5,000 a month to cover your costs and debt. So there you go. So you can't do it for $2,000 a month, never mind $1,000 a month without government subsidy or government regulation. So I think that's the basic thing that's driving it.
It's back to your, it's more than economics 101. It's a complex system. And that also feeds into, I think you're talking about apartment buildings, but that's also probably why we're seeing these larger homes, right? Because the land itself is valuable, right?
Exactly. Certainly there's a demand for larger homes, but also if you can only build one home on 2 acres of land, you're going to build the biggest home that you can build to make the most money off that 2 acres of land, absolutely. But just in terms of the other dynamic, we saw housing prices in June, average median house went to 890,000 and change. The next month, across the state, the next month it was $841,000. Did housing get cheaper by $50,000 in 1 month? Could that happen? Well, actually, yes, because of interest rates going up.
Right.
But it's not any more affordable. So again, it's just another piece of the pie that as money is constrained, you'll see some reducing in prices. As money becomes more available, you'll see prices skyrocket again. Money is sometimes attached to how many people there are, but it's not just attached to people, because we know there are investors from all over the world looking at housing, not as a place to live, but as a place to make money.
Right. It's something we want to get into. We want to remind everyone, if you're here at the library, if you've got a question, come on up. We've got Annie and Alexi here. If you'd like to write down the question, they'll feed it to us or give you an opportunity to share it. And if you're joining us on YouTube, you can use the chat function and put your question in there. We're monitoring those. And we have received some questions. I'll throw one out. Let's see. This is from Jay in Roslindale. Those stories, he's, I think, talking about the stories we shared from our Priced Out series, are distressing. One possible plus is that the city and state might collect additional tax to put more resources to housing. Is that happening? Ellen, I think you were getting at this when you said the 20%.
Yes, so 20, that's not around taxes, but what that is it's essentially built into our zoning laws, which we have the power to do locally because it is zoning. Many things, when we want to change them in terms of property ownership, landlord-tenant law, we have to get permission from the state to do that. Zoning is one thing that's carved out for municipalities. So as a municipality, the city of Somerville had said, if you're going to do new development in the city of Somerville, you're going to have to provide 20% affordable units. We have the most aggressive inclusionary policy in the state. We're really proud of that. Other places have looked to it as an example. But the other piece of this that you asked about, the tax revenue, both Joe and I have been working really, really hard on legislative campaigns that would allow us to take a little bit of the profit that is made off of these high-end real estate transactions and have that money designated for affordable housing. We need to be able to harness some of the huge amount of profit that's being generated right now and turn it back into the supply of housing that we so badly need. Because as Joe said, with prices that you need $5,000 for a mortgage, we need serious municipal, state, and federal investment in our housing in order to make the numbers work, to make sure that our most vulnerable families are successfully housed.
This is an additional tax, in addition to existing real estate taxes.
It's additional, only a one-time fees on high-end real estate transactions. So we're really looking at something that would only take a very, very small amount of funding, but for us as a municipality, it would give us $6 to $10 million. If real estate transfer fees, if the enabling legislation that we were working on passed, we would have $6,000 to $10,000 a year, and that can be bonded. That money can be helped to raise matching funds elsewhere. So it could be a really important solution for municipalities that are struggling on the front lines, because we're the ones who are seeing each of these stories, each of these tenants, and being asked to come up with solutions for how we keep our residents in our cities. And I believe that what we call the real estate transfer fee is a common sense solution that really would help us in a big way to generate the kinds of funds locally that we need to be able to produce and fund and develop affordable housing.
Although I believe the pushback on that, Joe, is that it could discourage development, that there's more if there's more being taxed, there may be less of an incentive to build.
Yeah, you hear that. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think we're seeing price increases in real estate values increasing, 5-10% per year, even more. Adding a 0.5% or 1% or 2%, one-time additional tax, it gets baked into the system. I don't think that's an argument that holds much water. And Ellen is exactly right. Without some version of that kind of a property tax, transfer tax, new development does generate new property taxes, but because of Prop 2.5, it doesn't necessarily create a lot of opportunity for new spending on housing. Very few, if any, municipalities spend general property tax revenue on affordable housing. The city of Boston does a little bit of that, but that is funding our schools, it's funding municipal services, it's funding our parks, it's funding important things, and community assets that in fact help maintain real estate values. So we need to do something else. The only small exception to that would be the Community Preservation Act, which in some municipalities does generate a little bit of money for affordable housing.
We should just backtrack just a minute for people who aren't familiar. Prop 2.5 caps how much the tax rate can go up in any given community, right?
Okay.
So you're saying even if this new development is worth millions, there's a cap to how much in taxes it will generate.
Yeah, new
per year.
developments you can add, but as properties go up, you can't just keep taxing them. So Mike, my assessment has actually gone down in recent years because values in other parts of the neighborhood are going up, other parts of the city are going up faster than in my neighborhood. So they have to keep it overall capped.
Right, so there's the taxes, and Ellen, what you got at with the inclusionary zoning, that's something separate, just to make that
Separate
clear.
than the real estate transfer fees,
Very
correct.
generous in Somerville, but not, Joe, it is not a universal thing across the state. Somerville may say, okay, 20% of new units that are built must be affordable. Another community could say, there's no requirement for affordability,
Absolutely,
right?
and we see that. So the City of Boston, the requirement is 13%, although I think Mayor Wu is looking to raise that, and hopefully she will. But at the Suffolk Downs development, which is both part in Boston and part in Revere, they made a special agreement to do 20% affordable on the Boston side. The Revere side, 0.
Oh, that's fascinating. And explain for people who may, again, not be familiar, Suffolk Downs is a huge parcel of property, a former horse racing track that's going to be as big as the Seaport District in Boston, or somewhat comparable major development,
I don't know
right?
exactly, but yes, comparable. It's a very large, I think there's going to be thousands and thousands of housing units as well as other, commercial and retail.
Stephanie, we have a question from Ingrid at the mic. She has a question. She's gone through mediation for a no-fault eviction. Ingrid, you want to ask your question?
Hi, thank you for having this morning. It really helps try to process everything. I said if I have gone through mediation for a no-fault eviction and signed a stipulation agreement, is there anything that I can do to get more time? Because it's really difficult to find anything affordable.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one if that's okay.
Yeah.
It's difficult once agreements are signed in court, but what I would say is two things. One, if you had a legal services attorney or you had access to an attorney, I would certainly talk to them. Judges are often fairly sympathetic in this climate, and when you go in, as long as you are showing exactly what you're doing to look for housing, that means keeping a housing log, that means being able to tell them why you have not yet found a unit. Judges will often do what they call stay the execution or give additional time to find something. So I would really recommend going for a stay if you need to in court, but also trying to find out what housing search resources there are near you that might be able to help. Sometimes to pay for realtors, sometimes that have lists of affordable units and no landlords. But I would really encourage you to go back into court if you need more time, because oftentimes judges are sympathetic. It's harder when you signed an agreement because sometimes they say, you did this, you do, this is, but it's still worth doing and it still sometimes is successful.
Ingrid, thank you so much for asking your question. And I'd like to point out that we are having this event here in Copley Square, downtown Boston. It's at the middle of the afternoon. And we invited all the people who have written into us for our Priced Out series and other people we thought might be interested. And I think it's worth pointing out that many of the people who are facing housing crises, pointed out, A, they can't afford to get here, B, can't afford time off work. I just would like to acknowledge that because just as a kind of a further explanation of how difficult and how pervasive housing issues are in people's lives. So if you are here, you are welcome to come up and talk to Annie and Alexi. They'll get you a card and you can ask your question. And if you're watching us on the YouTube stream, even if it's not live, it will live on YouTube, you can certainly put your questions there and we'll keep an eye on them and try to answer those in ways throughout the course of this Priced Out series. So I just do want to share that.
And so, Stephanie, we do have another question from the audience. This is Maria, who's not coming to the mic, but she gives us her question. Given that many office workers won't be coming back to downtown office buildings full-time, is there a possibility for the reuse of those buildings for housing? Joe, you want to take that one?
Well, I'll take it. I don't know the answer. Everyone's asking that, and I think inevitably there's going to be less space occupied as offices. A lot of companies are downsizing, even if they're not eliminating the office completely. But converting that to residential is not easy and is not likely to be cheap. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an architect, so I don't want to go where I don't know. But I think that will be a small and slow transformation.
So it may sound easier than it actually is. Yeah. Did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I would just add that I think there is a trend towards multi-use, multi-development, right? Commercial, residential, office, and I think we are going to continue to see that happening. Again, got to have regulations, though, that can harness some of that if we want to make it as affordable housing. Got to have those inclusionary rules. Got to have the policies in place that will make that work.
Right.
I'd like to share a question we received from an audience person in Belmont, Juliet. She wrote in to say, getting back to luxury. Luxury is of way less value to me than affordable rent. Yet if any housing is being added, it's luxury units. We live in a free country, but can anything be done to stop this trend of developers driving up prices so only the ultra-rich can afford to live in this state? I believe in her correspondence with us, Juliet pointed out that she's not at the point where she's at risk of losing her housing, but she fears she may be. And we talked a little bit about this, why developers do build luxury housing, sort of the economics behind it. But Joe, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, especially because this is part of what the community development corporations do, right, is to find housing and create affordable housing. And you actually say, as kind of dire as some of this reporting has been, and it's really a little bit heartbreaking, quite frankly, that there is a silver lining here in terms of affordable housing and in Massachusetts. I mean, it could be worse, and we have some blueprints, right?
Yeah, well, I think Massachusetts has a lot to be proud of over decades in terms of affordable housing policy that we have put in place that has made a difference for thousands and thousands of people. Not enough; it's never enough. But we have done a lot of important things. In 1969, we passed anti-snob zoning legislation called Chapter 40B that's produced 70,000 homes, 25% of which at least are affordable to low and moderate income people.
Why is it called anti-snob?
Because it allows multifamily housing development in communities that would otherwise outlaw it and only allow single families. So every municipality in Massachusetts either has to have 10% of their housing stock affordable, and we can get into what that means, or developers are allowed to go into that municipality, override local zoning, and build apartment buildings for people. And that's been an important tool for 50 years in this state. We are also one of, I think, 2 or 3 states in the country that has a state-funded rental assistance program that provides vouchers. We are one of the 2 or 3 states in the country that has state-owned public housing. We are one of the few states that puts its own tax dollars into subsidized housing. We are a right to shelter state for people that are facing homelessness. All of these programs are too small. They have lots of strings. They're not perfect. But compared to most other states, we're doing a lot more for our people. That said, the problem keeps getting tougher. And we need to step up our game, and we need to expand these tools. We actually know some of the things that work, and we just need to put more money and put more emphasis on them.
Progressive with some of these policies, but of course Massachusetts is, I think, one of the latest studies that came out, we're the number 3 in terms of housing expense, right? So we've got a very high bar.
The same organization said we're the 3rd most expensive place for how much money you need to earn to afford a median apartment. And we also have the 3rd largest number of affordable homes for extremely low income people in the greater Boston area. We are about 25% better than the national average. And that's because of these programs. The challenge is, if you're not in one of those units, that's useless to you.
Right.
And those units don't turn over very often because people want to keep them. And so you have sort of like 2 housing markets, those who are kind of in the system and those who are locked out.
That's right.
So, but you mentioned the anti-snob element. That is the intent. So I have to get to another comment we got from a Reddit user. It's about NIMBY, not in my backyard. Why don't more people talk about how NIMBYs are causing the crisis with all their ridiculously restrictive zoning laws? Isn't that the sort of the ultimate wall to all of this, to the zoning? Because when you watch housing battles play out, Even the most liberal of residents might be in there defending for reasons of the environment or overcrowding in my school. It comes down to NIMBYism.
So I'd say a couple of things. There is also something called the YIMBY movement, right? Which is yes in my backyard. I think as there has been this recognition that NIMBYism has been such a barrier for the development of affordable housing, you've been seeing forces come out to say, how do we reshape this conversation? How do we say that a lot of the fears that people have going into this, our classes will be too crowded, you know, we're going to have more crime, that ultimately so many of those things that people were concerned about don't actually happen once the developments are built, and opposition decreases once they're
How do they get
happening.
addressed? How does YIMBYism happen?
So in the first place, right, there has been evidence to show that the school districts are not impacted in the same way, sadly, in some ways, because what Joe says, that we are having a decrease in family size that are coming into properties, right? But also that the levels of violence, the assumptions, people with coming at times from the NIMBYism, there are a lot of stereotypes that are built into people's own fear. I don't want to say intentional racism or other things, but it's a fear, right, of having other people that aren't like me, having less parking, having to share with more people. But the YIMBY movement is really recognizing we have a broken system. We have a system where increases in rents are not matched by increases in wages. And so as more and more people see that this system is fundamentally broken for what is such a basic human need, they're starting to come out and say, hey, this is a problem across the board, not just for poor people, this is a problem for everybody in the state. And I think that attitudes around that are slowly changing.
As we talk about YIMBYs and NIMBYs, I'd like to actually go back to our conversation, Ellen, on Boston Public Radio earlier today. We were talking about, because I think it's related, and Joe, I want you to weigh in. There is legislation that is going to require 175 communities to build multifamily housing if they have easy access to MBTA, train, or bus service. And it's hard to think about that without thinking about NIMBYs versus YIMBYs, I guess. Do you see that legislation actually making a difference and overcoming some of these attitudes and concerns that people in small towns that don't want the character of their town changed, worry about the schools and the traffic and the sewer systems? Do you see that legislation kind of making a difference and creating more housing?
I think it's a really consequential piece of legislation, and really pleased that it was adopted by the legislature and signed by the governor. I think it will force those 175 municipalities to have a serious conversation with themselves, with each other, about what they want their future to be. That is a good thing. But I think, it shouldn't be that surprising. When you think about where you want to live, the first thing you think about is, what neighborhood or town do I want to live in? Not which house, which neighborhood or town. And you pick that neighborhood or town because you like it. So when you move there, and then somebody proposes to change what you like, it's not surprising that people react to that. And people do that across income streams and across neighborhoods. And I think, we need to have some acknowledgement or respect for that. At the same time, we can't be so parochial that only the people who live within 10 feet of a property have a say in what happens there. Because what happens in Everett, what happens in Worcester affects me here in Boston, and vice versa. So we all have a stake, and we need a process that respects and listens to all those different voices. And I think this legislation is an embodiment of that, because it's saying we as a state, as a community of people, have an interest in what happens in each of these MBTA communities, because we are all investing in the MBTA and investing in the public infrastructure that it represents. So that being said, I think, again, zoning changes take time. This will take time. It doesn't require anything get built. It only changes the zoning, if it even does that, because some towns may resist for a while. And 20 years ago, we passed Chapter 40R, which was a similar attempt to encourage multifamily zoning in transit areas. It resulted in thousands of units, but not tens of thousands of units. Now, it ran into the Great Recession as well. So I think the conversation is really important. I don't think NIMBYs will disappear. They will find other ways to fight, and the cost issues will still be there, we talked about earlier.
When it
earlier.
comes to MBTA communities, though, will wealthy towns find ways to just say, because the penalties really are grants and funds that a municipality would have access to, so can't wealthy communities just say, you know what, we can do without that?
We don't know that entirely. So yes, I don't think the grants are likely to be sufficient to motivate every municipality. But it's not entirely clear there isn't some opportunity for private legal action. And so we'll have to wait and see, and there could be further legislation as well. One thing that I think Ellen and I were talking about earlier, though, that I do want to underscore is there's no requirement for affordability in these districts. It's allowed, but it's not required. And that's something that disappoints, I think, both of us. I don't want to speak for Ellen, but this was a great opportunity to get more affordable housing near transit. The people who most need the transit are people of low and moderate incomes. And so we're going to have to work at the local level in every single one of those cities and towns to get some affordability into those districts.
175 of them, Joe. There's a lot. I'd like to, because we are, unfortunate, I told you this hour would go by fast.
You did tell me.
I'd like to turn to our audience. We have Brandy at the mic, and she's got a question for Joe. Hi, Brandy.
Hello? Hello?
I can hear you.
We hear you.
That's good. So, my name is Dr. Brandy Brooks, and this issue, I'm so glad you're amplifying it today because it's personal for me. My family, when I was in elementary school, we became homeless after our house burned down. Now, as a professional, I am the deputy director at Higher Ground, and some of the work we do is around educational outcomes as well as providing search, placement, and stability for homeless students. And we also provide wraparound services with respect to mental health and behavioral health. But with respect to housing, my question for Joe is, again, we do this work in partnership, as you know, Joe, with BHA, with BPS, with Project Hope, with DSNI, and others. But my question is, would CDCs like yours or others, would they support increasing 10% set aside for affordable units for homeless families with children attending Boston Public Schools? And if so, at what level?
Well, thanks for the question, and I think it's really important to talk about the connection between housing security, housing stability, and educational outcomes, because we know that children who are losing their home, moving from place to place, do not do as well in school. And certainly children who are homeless are going to have a hard time excelling in school. So this is a conversation that's been happening for a while about what percentage is the right percentage to put into an affordable housing development of families that have experienced homelessness. Many of those families need services to support them, to help them navigate social networks and so forth. And CDC's, my members are organizations that build affordable housing, but we are not social service agencies that are always well trained and skilled to provide those services and provide those supports. So we need partners and we need ongoing funding to pay for that. So I think with those caveats, I think our members are very interested in serving that population, whether at 10%, 20%, it might vary on the property and it might vary on the organization and their ability to serve that population well. But as you know, for affordable housing, even with subsidies to serve that population, we need ongoing operating dollars, rental vouchers. We need those support services. So, I think that we need to make sure that every child has a stable home so they can succeed in school, and we are not achieving that right now. Ellen, did you want to weigh in on
Yeah,
this?
is there a second for me to do
Absolutely.
that? I wanted to say this, thank you so much for raising this question. In Somerville, that's one of the very issues that we are trying to look at is how do we make sure our kids stay in our schools and in their communities. And we are about to, hopefully, we're on the brink of launching something called the municipal voucher program, where the city will have vouchers available for people that aren't eligible for federal programs with a top priority for people with kids in the public schools. So you really need the creativity of municipalities, the state, and the federal government to be saying, how do we make sure that our kids are not falling behind educationally? So it's for every sector to really be creative to make sure that this is something that they're thinking about, especially as household size decreases, as Joe pointed out, and people are getting forced further and further out of our urban cores where jobs are available and quality education is available. So I'm really glad it's tough. Anytime you give a priority to one group, you're taking it away from somebody else. And I see all the different kinds of people in my office, all of whom, in many ways, I could say need priority, right? But I do think that we have to focus on our children, and it's really important that we're looking at that. That is a policy issue in housing.
All right, thank you so much.
Brandy, thank you. Ellen, just very quickly, we were talking about this earlier off camera before the event. Will you just talk a little bit about how housing insecurity can lead to families actually breaking up?
Yeah, I mean, the consequences that come from homelessness are so vast. Talking about things like greater incidence of heart disease, more lead paint poisoning, educational loss, as Joe was talking about, all kinds of loss of jobs. But one of the most devastating and one of the saddest situations is where you see homeless families splitting up for many reasons. 2 kids can go over here because my sister has a couch. Well, they'll let those 2 kids stay. Mom is potentially in a shelter by herself. I know Joe talked about us being a right to shelter state, but there are many families who are not eligible for shelter in this Commonwealth, and people don't realize that. So I frequently see these situations. They break my heart, and so that's why I do the work I do. That's why Joe does what he does, right? Because we don't want to see children being separated from their families solely because of financial issues, not because there was any adjudication that they were at risk. It's really tragic.
So Ellen, we have to give Ava at the mic because she is speaking directly to what you are talking about. She relocated to Boston and is currently living in a shelter. Ava, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. I relocated in the spring with my son, who's a teenager. And when I reached out to, I think it was like a homeless coordinator, I was advised that I wasn't eligible for any shelters, specifically family shelters, because my son was a teenager. I wasn't eligible for any type of resources that were available because I was not a Massachusetts resident. I'm currently living in a women's shelter right now, and their resources aren't available to me because I don't fit the criteria of the women that come into their program. And my question is, what resources are available to families who are relocating or have relocated to Boston but cannot find affordable housing?
So is it okay? Take this one. So thank you so much for sharing that story. The first thing I want to say to you is you always need to think, if you decide to reapply for family housing, you've got to reach out to Greater Boston Legal Services. I know I'm a little biased. I worked there for almost 30 years, but a lot of times the reasons that people are denied once they have advocates can be overcome. So for example, you're not a resident. The definition of residency is an intent to reside. So as long as you're here in Boston intending to reside, you should be able to meet the residency requirements for shelter. So it's always good to reach out to lawyers when you're seeing something like that. I know that isn't helping you at this moment, but you can always reapply, remember, and really reach out to an advocate. And then the housing world is so complicated, you need to turn to the experts. Please call Boston Office of Housing Stability, ask them for a referral for housing search. I'm sure you have some help in your shelter, but these things get really, really complicated. Even for lawyers, it's complicated how to actually navigate the housing system, and there are so many different rules for each kind of program. So I just urge you to do everything you can to connect to experts. Think about reapplying for family shelter and talking to an attorney to see whether or not you might actually be eligible for shelter. Although, just as a warning, people are getting placed anywhere in the state right now because there's such a high demand at this moment for family shelter. But you got to have faith, you got to keep on working, and you have to connect yourselves to the experts that are available in the field. So definitely Boston Office of Housing Stability, Greater Boston Legal Services are 2 great examples. They're certainly not the only ones. HomeStart is another excellent agency in Boston that helps with housing search. But make sure that you're able to get to the right people at the right time. The outcomes can be so different.
Thank you.
Okay, and Ava, you can check with our producers if you need that number. They can give you that number. I've just given them for Office of Housing Stability, if that helps you.
And Joe also wants to weigh in on Ava's question. And I believe that at the bottom of the screen on the YouTube page, you'll be seeing some of these resources. But Joe, to Ava's question.
I think Ava's story, and thank you for sharing that, really underscores the core problem, which is we have a scarcity model, which is we have enough affordable housing for 1 out of 4 eligible households, and we have to spend a tremendous amount of time deciding which one gets it and which 3 don't. And we have lots of rules for that, and lots of eligibility requirements, and lots of complicated processes for people to go through and navigate. And the reason we have to have all of that is because we only have 1 for every 4. And making that choice, of which one gets it, is a pretty difficult thing to do, and it would be a lot better if we had 4 homes for every 4 families.
Really difficult to think about when you look at somebody who is facing this, as the both of you do every day. We have just about a minute or so, 2 minutes, so you get a magic wand, both of you, okay? And you can do something that is going to help address this affordable housing shortage. What, Ellen, do you do?
Me first? Okay. The things that I am most committed to, this is obviously really complex, but a couple of things that I would say. One is we've talked about those real estate transfer fees to just increase the funding. We need more funding for affordable housing. We can't build these 4 units unless we have funding to do it. Market isn't working. The second thing we've talked a little bit about already, right to counsel, which means every person should have a right. The judge should tell them they have a right to an attorney because the consequences of eviction can be more extreme than the consequences of criminal prosecution. Somebody gets probation, they're home, they go to counseling. Someone loses their home, that can have spiraling impacts on their family for the next decade. So while there are many solutions, I would point to those 2 as things that are of primary importance. To me, lastly, I would just say we need some form of reasonable rent stabilization. It's happening, a movement around the country. There are 2 whole states that have it. There are more municipalities. We simply can't build our way. There will never be, in my lifetime, enough affordable housing. I'm not convinced we're going to get to that 4. So what that means is we have to keep people in their homes. We can't do this without the kinds of regulations that allow people to stay in place.
And we should point out that's a very complicated discussion. It would require legislative approval, right, in order to allow towns and cities to decide if they want to have rent stabilization. Joe, your magic wand would produce what solution?
Well, my magic wand would be to somehow deter, detract, push away these investors who are coming into our communities, not just here in Massachusetts, but across the country, and turning homes into financial assets. We have to get a handle on that. As long as housing is just seen as another way to make a buck, we're going to see these problems. And related to that is, people get evicted from homes that exist, not homes that are going to be built in the future. And the affordable housing industry, understandably, is focused on building more housing, which we need, but we need a bigger and better strategy for making sure that existing housing that's reasonably affordable, that's occupied by low and moderate income people, remains such. Rent stabilization is one way. Acquiring these properties, as many of our members and others are trying to do, is another. We had legislation to give tenants the right to purchase their property when it goes on the market. That's another tool. One of the disconnects is that we say we're building new affordable housing, but the folks facing eviction aren't necessarily going to get that housing. So we need to help them more directly. So those would be 2 things I would say, in addition to what Ellen said.
And just your point about landlords, we didn't get to discuss this much, but all landlords aren't the same, right? There's a difference.
That's right.
Between the mom and pops, perhaps, and the large corporations that are coming in.
You see that in the eviction data, you see that in the rent increase data. It's a very consistent story. So one of the big changes in our housing market is who owns property, and it is having vast ripple effects.
Liz Niesloss and our colleagues at GBH News are going to be very busy parsing out many of these ideas and questions and comments. This has really been an extraordinary discussion. Ellen Shachter from the Somerville Office of Housing Stability, Joe Kriesberg from the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations. We're just so grateful for your time, your insights, and your thoughts on actually, hopefully, at least easing this crisis. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And
Thanks
thanks,
for
and thank you to
reporting.
everyone who's joined us here at the library and who's.
And Stephanie, we should say that people can follow the reporting further on the website, which is gbhnews.org/news/priced out if you want to see more of our stories.
And we're just thankful to everyone who has shared their thoughts and their questions with us. And you can continue to do that right on our website. Thanks so much for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.